start flashing lights. Feels like 1,000 years have gone by without you. I miss someone like you, but wanna tell you some things.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
And for this show, we're going to be talking about the recently finished first season of Legion. Also, there's been some X news that's been bouncing around the interwebs, and there's some controversies and some developments in the X world that we feel we want to address. And in doing that, we decided to invite a very special guest onto the show. So please welcome to the show for the first time, Chris Roman. Chris is a professor at Kent State University. He teaches a variety of undergraduate and graduate courses, and he's going to be talking about some of those, including some queer theory curriculum that he's behind. So please, again, welcome Chris Roman. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Segueing from my awkward Reader's Digest version of your bio, why don't you do the real version here and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name's Christopher Roman. As you said, I'm a professor of English and medieval studies at Kent State University, and I do a lot with, of course, medieval literature. I do a lot with queer theory and queer theology, and I teach courses like like Chaucer and Tolkien, and this semester I'm teaching Intro to LGBT literature, and I do a lot with graphic novels in a lot of my different courses, including this semester teaching Alison Bechdel's Fun Home as we finish the semester here in my Intro to LGBT literature course. So that's a little bit about what I do. And just my most recent book is called Queering Richard Rawa. It's out by Polgrave. It just was published in January. You can get it on your Kindle if you're so inclined. At an affordable price.
Okay, Chris, when we have a special guest on the show, one thing we ask each time out, we're like Loverboy, we start from the start. How did you originally get into comics?
That's a good question. Like every good comic book collector, it starts with when your mother throws out your comic book collection and you realize how much you love comics.
Oh.
So that happened to me when I was younger. She threw away my, comic books were junk. So let's see, I don't know how old I was. I'll say my 8, 9, 10, somewhere along the line. I don't know, maybe I was just too attached to them, but I remember specifically she threw out the first run of Transformers. I had 1 through 12. I loved that run. But then ever since then, I came back to and I've always been sort of a Marvel guy. So I've always done, especially mutant comics. I've always collected those but I mean, to this point, I'm collecting Spider-Man and Iron Fist, and just my pull is crazy at this point. But so I think I got into comics through some friends. I remember being a very good friend of mine turned me on to Ghost Rider. He's a huge Ghost Rider fan. So we would trek. Have our paperboy money, get on the city bus, go down to Ides in downtown Pittsburgh, and just load up on comics and then read them all the way home on the bus. So that's probably that was where I started. And then ever since then, I've tried to incorporate them into my work and my kids, and it's my favorite leisure activity.
Okay.
Since I got there.
And when you're talking about Ghost Rider, is this the Danny Ketch era?
Yeah. So, let's see. So this is about late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
And historically, what have been some of your favorite titles and runs?
One thing that really stands out for me, just off the top of my head, is Todd McFarlane's run on Spider-Man. That run was in full. That one that wowed me. I enjoyed the hell out of that. Thinking some of my favorite storylines are things like the X-Men Inferno. I really love that storyline. Sort of the rebirth of the Iron Fist. What is that? David Aja? Is that right?
David Aja.
Aja, thank you. Yep. That really got me more interested in Iron Fist. Yeah, those two things are coming to mind at the moment, or those three things: the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, that first run of that very very early run of Transformers still sticks with me. I'd like to go back and collect those again. those really stick out to me. As well as I should throw in as well as Moon Knight. I'm a really big Moon Knight fan.
Okay.
So I've really enjoyed those different runs as well. So
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
Okay, fine. So again, why you're here is because I knew that you were a very big fan of the Legion series that recently aired on FX, and it was also a show that all three of us who were regular hosts on this call were raving about. We really only talked about the first episode on the show, so now that it's wrapped up, and since 8 episodes is a very manageable number to talk about an entire run, we have convened and we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to just give you the brief on what episode 1 was about, and misty watercolor memories come flash into our heads, and we'll talk about it. In the opening episode, the main character, David Heller, was being interrogated by government officials who believed he may be the most powerful mutant discovered. He explains that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was young, and he was taken to the Clockwork Psychiatric Hospital after attempting to commit suicide. He spent 6 years as a patient there, during which time he met Sid Barrett. That wasn't clever at all. A girl who refused to be touched. She agreed to be his girlfriend, but was eventually discharged from the hospital. Before she left, David kissed her goodbye, causing their minds to switch bodies. While losing control, Sid unleashed abilities from David's body that killed his friend Lenny Busker and trapped the other patients in their rooms. David was evacuated in Sid's body. Later, David's body returned to him, and he went looking for Sid. David found himself being chased by people until he was captured by the government. Now those two people, Denotomy Wallace, I hope I got that right because they really haven't said his name too often, and Carrie Loudermilk break into the government facility with Sid to rescue David and take him to Professor Melanie Bird. Steve, I think you were the first one to ever utter a word about Legion on this show, so going back to the first episode, what things stood out for you?
Well, I think the fact that it was so triply filmed. The editing was all over the map in a good way. I mean, it was in a very done in a very artistic way, as opposed to just sort of being a random jumping around without any purpose. And it really gave the feel of a character, or at least of a show that was going to be very different. The narrative structure was going to be a little bit different. There wasn't a lot of linearity at first, because of course, you're using a lot of flashbacks that don't really make a lot of sense. You're seeing a lot of thoughts or memories from David's perspective kind of being thrown in while he's experiencing life in Clockworks. And what's, I think, probably the most interesting part of it is this sense that he is seeing something, and that you as the viewer are seeing something that no one else can see. And that's, of course, this demon with glowing eyes that pops up all over the place. And it was actually, by the end of the episode, I was having fun trying to point him out, because he was making small appearances in the background or in the corners of certain scenes, rather than being front and center like in a few choice instances. But it definitely struck me not as an X-Men show, not until the very end during the rescue attempt, but as a I don't know, maybe more of an indie film featuring a protagonist who, of course, couldn't really be believed. Everybody around him is talking about his psychosis, and what you're seeing on screen is really just a perfect explanation or a perfect representation of what a psychosis could be. But it was fascinating, and it was not anything like what I expected an X-Men, the first attempt of a pure live-action X-Men film on a major network to be. And I think that was very, very good. It was a great sign, just seeing something that was so unique and so out there and completely subverted my expectations. I was blown away by it. And unfortunately, I didn't have the pleasure of enjoying Noah Hawley's other series of Fargo, both seasons 1 and 2, whereas Bryan did. And Bryan, of course, I think knew a little bit more of either, maybe not what to expect exactly, but more of how the showrunner built his shows, built his series. So I think Bryan might have an interesting take on that, just because he knows Noah Hawley a little bit better than I can.
Well, I mean, I've never read any of his stuff, like, because he's a novelist prior, right? But I mean, as a showrunner, yeah, I've seen the 2 shows that he had made previously, and we talked about this in the last episode that we talked about Legion. And Noah's like, he's more of an auteur, and I'm kind of amazed that after his first success with the first season of Fargo, that even as soon as the second series, he really started taking some crazy departures from what I would consider most, like, kind of straight up television. I mean, it is on FXX. Is it FX or FXX? One of those
FX.
two.
It's FX.
FX.
Just FX. Okay.
Just the 1X.
Just the 1X. So yeah, it's he really does take his time. It's, I would say, as close to decompressed comics and decompressed television as you can probably get, especially in Legion, because there was so much repetition of memory. And in that first episode, you really have to go back and sort of, after you've watched the whole show, you should go back and watch it again, because there are so many things in that very opening kind of progression through David's life, which I actually really liked. The end of the end of the show, they kind of played back through that somewhat, but like just sort of setting the stage for David's memories, which feature so prominently, at least in the first half of the series, if not throughout. And the idea that there is, I mean, we're spoiling some things here, I think, to some extent. There is this thing existing in him. At first, you don't know if it's him, just, sort of a split personality kind of a take, or this creature, this entity, the devil with yellow eyes, that is corrupting and manipulating and even changing and even inventing memories in David. And that sort of sets you up for the unreliable narrator. Not that David is, he isn't really a narrator. I guess in some parts he probably is more than others, but like they don't use his omniscient or his third person voice.
Right.
I'm going to screw this up. I'm sorry, Chris, I'm going to screw up my English lit from 20 years ago, but like he isn't like the narrator at all. He's the focal point, but he's certainly just one of many characters, but his existence is so prominently featured in the story that it almost takes on that. So I anytime you do unreliable narrator in any fiction of any kind, and nowadays in nonfiction, I think, to some extent with the Trump administration, like, it is amazing to me, and I just am hooked immediately. And so as soon as I kind of got the vibe that that's what they were doing, which they certainly don't put all their cards on the table at first, it was just, I was in. So the first episode is very, I think the only complaint I had way back when we talked about it was a little self-indulgent. Like, there were moments where I'm like, did you really need a dance number? I mean, I liked it. It was fun. Did you need it? What exactly, storytelling-wise, did that serve? Like, what purpose? Like, but that's Noah. Like, he's very capricious. I mean, if you've seen the second season of Fargo and you finished it, towards the end, there's some kind of crazy shit that you're like, what? What? Huh? What? Like, why? So, I mean, I think that's just his unique sensibilities, and again, I'm a fan, so I'm good with that.
Okay, throwing it over to Chris, because that's the first time we've heard his opinions on this. Chris, what did you think of that first episode?
I think one of the things that really hooked me from the beginning was there's 2 things. One is its efforts to keep the audience guessing. So I felt like we were piecing together a narrative throughout the episode, so we're trying to figure out what time was kind of all messed up, order of events were kind of messed up, so I think that was what really hooked me, and trying to figure out, like, just really what the hell's going on here, and how did this guy get in this mess, and 2, I think that leads into the second thing that really intrigued me, was just the attempt to represent mental illness, which is I think a really fascinating thing about this series. And I've always appreciated the concept of mutants as metaphors for different oppressed groups. So I really appreciated this series and even though we like later on we find out it's much more a little bit more about a parasite, but there's still something intriguing about Legion being or possibly and I know there's sort of a turn halfway through where Melanie kind of insists that he's not mentally ill, but I think at the beginning he's really wrestling with this sort of this issue of mental illness. Like, how do I perceive the world? What is wrong? Well, what is wrong with me? How do I figure this? How do I figure out these events that are happening to me? Why am I sort of trapped in clockworks? So I was hooked in thinking about how we represent these characters with mental illness, and how sort of sympathetic it is, because I really I think it's the other thing about Legion is I'm identifying with him pretty early, and I could he be a anti-hero? Could he be a hero? Is this a villain? It's a little bit up in the air at the beginning, but I empathized with his plight from the beginning and his ability and his need to just figure things out. So those two things really caught me from the beginning, and so really wanted to keep watching and see how those things got resolved.
Well, I'm just going to reiterate some things I said first time around, and in some ways, since there is some distance between that first viewing and now, I feel just as strongly about some of these elements. One thing that I thought we were in for when we saw the trailers for the show, and especially taking stuff out of the creative world and looking at the business side of it, I was astonished that this was the first co-production between Marvel Studios and Fox, who has the X-Men license. Most of the indications were in those original trailers were, while certainly there were avant elements of the visuals that was presented, they did concentrate more on the action-oriented elements, and I thought we were in for something a bit more conventional. I'm very happy to see that it wasn't that. I wouldn't want to use a term as crass as a bait and switch, but it was a surprise. It was a real surprise that this was the type of format that they went with for this kind of milestone event, in that, I don't want to say warring factions, but studios with different interests combining together to present something that was this nuanced. I was a huge Downton Abbey fan. There was nothing that Dan Stevens presented on that show that even hinted at the range that he provides on this series. I think going in, I thought they're going to surround him with good character actors and it'll be fine. I really thought we would see variations throughout his entire career of Matthew Crawley, and he's displaying chops that I never saw before in those 3 seasons that I enjoyed him on Downton Abbey. My takeaway, again, I just don't want to go into reiterating what you guys have said, but one thing that I think is a very important element of this series is the music choices. Mm-hmm. And for the minute and 30 seconds that they played Jane's Addiction's Up the Beach as he had his first sort of psychic freak out, for that minute and 30, Up the Beach was the greatest song ever recorded. And I do think that there is, and we had other moments during that first episode, like the Stone, She's a Rainbow, and just a perfect placement of Happy Jack very early on in the episode. I do think that marrying creative images to music that's already in the public psyche is a very peculiar art, and I think what this series is doing outside of trailers is a totally separate thing, but in terms of works of art where they do use older music in new ways, I think this has been the best use of that probably since Lust for Life and Perfect Day and Trainspotting. I've just been really happy and really kind of on the edge of my seat when there is a familiar song, and to see what they do throughout the various episodes. So that's another very important takeaway I have from the series. So, on to episode 2. Should properly say that these are called chapters. At chapter 2, while they're at Summerland, which is Melanie Bird's facility, David begins his memory work, and he's working with... Did you ever get the pronunciation of this guy's name, the African-American guy?
I heard them say Tonomy.
Tonomy, okay. And this is a mutant who remembers everything and can enter other memories. Melanie, who was played by the always great Jean Smart, explains that David David has been captured by Division 3, a government division focused on capturing and studying mutants. She instead wants to help David by showing him that the onset of his illness was just his powers manifesting. In David's childhood memories, he is haunted by a children's book his father read to him, The World's Angriest Boy in the World, in which the title character murders his mother. In his memories before his admission to Clockworks, David took drugs with Lenny to try to block out the voices he hears. Melanie places David in an MRI scanner to study how his brain works, during which time he accidentally projects his mind to the present-day Clockworks, where his sister Amy is looking for him. Amy is kidnapped by Division 3, causing David to panic and teleport the MRI scanner outside Summerlin. David races to save Amy, but Sid convinces him to wait and master his powers first. Any takeaways from that one?
I think that's pretty much it. Pretty thorough summary. I honestly, I think this is the first time where we start to see that the memories that we've been shown in the first episode, that there's something more than just filmic techniques that are causing the glitches and the aberrations. That it's not just clever editing, that there's actually something, there's a purpose to that editing, a purpose and a visual cue that others can see too, not just the audience, but also, Autonomy and Melanie and Sid, when they're in there with his memories, they see the glitches. They see the things that we as the audience see, which is, it's an interesting technique for the show to spotlight that. Because up to this point, we're just, we're kind of along for the ride. As, Bryan had mentioned, it's, kind of the indulgence of Noah, just kind of going, look what crazy things I can do with editing and wacky camera work and, interesting music. But that there's actually a real world, carryover, that these are actually visible and experienced by outside people, not just the focal point of the show, not just David. So I think that was an interesting thing that we first see, and of course is expanded a lot more in chapter 3, but that's where we see that, hey, there's something going on in his head that's not necessarily just clever production.
Right, and we have to start questioning everything we've seen already.
And I think this was, kind of to go back, one of the things that we did talk about the first time that we talked about Legion is we were trying to speculate who the yellow-eyed demon was, or who that demon was. Mm-hmm. And by appearances in the first episode, I was thinking, large, blobby and misshapen, yellow, it's Mojo. But around this time, like starting in chapter 2, chapter 3, the idea of another figure being this, this creature or this strange thing that keeps popping up in David's head, it started to come up a lot more. And I think a lot of other people had guessed that early on as well, who it could possibly be. We do find out for sure, several episodes later, but it's starting to creep in that if you were not sure, if you were on the fence, something is leading us down that path on who this entity might be.
I definitely felt with the second episode that the show was a little more constrained than I may have thought with the pilot or the first episode. Like the first episode takes place in different venues and sort of jumps around, and is a little more almost like not movie. I mean, it's a whole thing shot like a movie, but like it just felt very expansive. And then this kind of constrained it back into these sort of like default, okay, this is probably where most of this is going to be. And so you kind of got the lay of the land, which was amazing. I want to know where they shot that Summerland camp.
Probably somewhere in Canada.
Yeah.
It looked like
I think it was like Toronto or Vancouver or something. Yeah, I think it was Canada.
Like, I want to know, like, if it was like, cause it had a Frank Lloyd Wright vibe in certain respects, and then something a little more modern in other, like, so, like, I just want to know, is that, like, how many different little buildings did they go to in Toronto or wherever, and they captured that kind of really kind of cool, modern, but also sort of retro in some ways, architecture and vibe. But yeah, like, you just kind of spend time with meeting some of the more supporting characters, which was great, because, I mean, Carrie, when you first meet her, right? Is Carrie both people or just the one?
Both. It's
No.
Carrie and Carrie.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, cool. So like you meet one Carrie, and then in the second episode you meet the other Carrie, and you don't quite realize that they're connected, that there's a relationship. But then by I think the end of that, when he's talking to David in the MRI, you kind of start to get the sense that okay, wait, they are like related, or there's something going on. I think it was maybe a later episode too that made it really explicit. Like, oh look, she comes right out of him. It's a whole weird duo, two-person thing. But the landscape of the show, I think, like I said, really starts to settle in that second episode, and I felt like that made it a little less exciting. I don't know. First episode was really great. Second episode, I still liked it, but I definitely felt like it came down from that kind of sense of experimental, sort of something special into this episode. It got back to that later, so I mean, certainly it didn't stay there. But I don't know if you guys felt like maybe a little bit of a come down on that second episode.
Well, that was done purposefully. I think the first episode had to kind of shove as much as possible, to make it very apparent for the audience that it's visually interesting. Visually, this is what we're about. We're going to show these crazy things. You've got an unreliable, main character that you can't tell if what he's thinking is real, what he's seeing is real, what you're seeing is real. And I think that's a little too frenetic to keep up the entire pace for a whole, even 8-episode season. That second episode, even though it did have a few of those moments, was a lot more calm and allowed for, I think, more contemplative stretches where David could actually talk and people could talk calmly around him without something crazy happening. And that pacing, I think, changes a little bit throughout the season as needed. Maybe not always successfully, but it's done with purpose, and that there's actually some moments where they want you to lean in, where they're quieter, where simple things are happening, slow things are happening. They want you to focus a little bit more rather than to be shocked, surprised, and distracted by a lot of the craziness that's about to happen.
Chris, anything you want to
add? I want to go back to that mojo point, because one of the things that I found myself doing, and maybe this started in episode 2, I'm not totally sure, is trying to find parallels with the actual mutant universe. And so, yeah, I thought the same exact thing. When it was this blobby yellow thing in the corner, it became much more legible. I'm like, oh, man, that's very mojo-ish, right? So I found myself doing that to a lot of these characters because Legion is definitely an X-Men comic character. So I was thinking about Sid as kind of a rogue character, and I started trying to figure out what these parallels are and where this sort of fit into the comic universe. But of course they're all they end up being sort of their own unique characters, and they're not exactly there's not exact connections. But I think that's one of the things that the show does really well, is sort of suck you into, especially if you're a mutant fan, to suck you into thinking who these characters might be, and is there some sort of real connection between the comic book universe and the sort of TV version of the mutant universe. And it even becomes, I think, more explicit later on when we talk about, I don't know, probably chapter 6 or so, when we find out about Legion's father. But spoilers.
Yeah, I do think I was doing the same thing in a sense that I was trying to align my conceptions of what this creative vision would be of Mojo World. And is this what we're seeing? I definitely was doing the same thing with that. I had never thought about Chapter 2 as being, Brian, you didn't use the word weak, but that there was a change in tone. And for some reason, I'm comparing this to musicals, because with stage musicals, it's very easy to dazzle people with an opening number. But if you go through the history of musical comedies and what's grown out of musical comedies, basically is the 2 to 3 o'clock period is the period that's almost always rewritten in tryouts, because that's where you have to bring everybody in from the dazzle into the storyline and to start to care about the characters and to care about the momentum of the storyline. It's very interesting. I didn't really think I would be making that comparison, but I think it's pretty apt here. I also enjoyed, in a sense, that we have incorporation of horror elements so early on. I wasn't really expecting that. I think apart from those brief flashes that you got in the first episode, there wasn't anything in that first episode that I would characterize as horror. And starting in 2, and it certainly gets much darker later on with his memories of particularly the children's book and that fucked up head and all that. That was disconcerting in an enjoyable way. That we started seeing those type of elements in this narrative. So, okay, chapter 3. David continues memory work with, oh God, this is gonna kill me. Autonomy and Melanie exploring his time-taking drugs before his admission to Clockworks. As they watch this unfold, David is haunted by apparitions. His mind works against Tanami's powers. I got it right the first time there. And he accidentally teleports their physical bodies to a different room. While undergoing more tests, David again loses control, projecting his mind and Sid's to Division 3, where they find Amy being interrogated. One of her interrogators, a mutant called the Eye, sees these projections before they return to their bodies. Melanie explains that the Eye is Walter, one of the founders of Summerland, alongside her missing husband Oliver. Desperate for a breakthrough with David, Melanie sedates him to a point where she, Tanami, and Sid can enter his mind and explore freely. However, his memories work against him, with an embodiment of the world's angriest boy in the world chasing them through a version of David's childhood home until all three are forced out of David's head. Okay?
Now, there is something interesting in this one, and I think it's one of the first big fake-outs is kind of done away with. And that's the faces of the parents. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a I think it was a little bit of a red herring from the first couple episodes, where we were never able to see his father's face, but we also were never able to see his mother's face. It was always obscured, by an interesting camera angle, or her hair, or there's a shadow or something. And of course, people who know of Legion's history from the comics were thinking maybe that was a signal for something. Maybe that was some kind of, that it's being obscured on purpose, that there's something really, either sinister or something really, telling about this. But in the third episode, nope, just kidding. It has nothing to do with that, because you actually do see the faces of the parents very clearly when Melanie Bird is walking alone through the house. And so you're like, oh, well, maybe the parents don't have anything to do with it. And it's at that point that you realize that there's something else going on with the world's angriest boy in the world, that this might be an independent entity. This might be an independent evil that is working against him, and that's been there for a long time, at least in his memories, if not in real life. It also has a really great moment with Sid and child David, which is actually probably one of the more intense moments in this episode. I actually was on the edge of my seat going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. As they're climbing through the ductwork in this house, I'm like, wow, what kind of AC unit does this house have? You can climb around in it. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely pretty intense. And of course, I was very intrigued that by the fact that the whole thing with the parents and what did the stars say and all of that really isn't really maybe not meaningful in the literal sense. Maybe it has to do with something else, and that the parents really aren't really a major factor in this. But it also has some interesting things too, where we start to realize that Amy, the sister, might be a more important character than we've come to think.
She knows things.
She knows things, and the things she says, even though Katie Aselton, who's the actress who I love, and I loved in The League, and this is as far from her character in The League as you can get, her lines probably carry just as much meaning of any of the other main characters in this series, because she doesn't have a lot of screen time. When she is on screen, the things she says are ridiculously important and have a lot more meaning than going into the next episode or the following episode, where we see a lot more of what's making David tick and what really is going on. Mm-hmm. So
this episode also had what I thought was the loveliest moment throughout the series. Since Sid cannot touch another human being without her powers manifesting, since they were in David's mindscape, she was able to touch the childhood version of David. And there was such a sweetness to that gentle moment. I loved that little bit in that episode. Brian, Chris, anything you want to add there?
Oh, the one thing I'm thinking about that we haven't really touched upon yet is one of the things that I think the series does and it sort of builds on is we're never quite sure of the extent of his powers. Mm-hmm. I really remember thinking like what can't he do? and I feel like every episode we get a little bit more until later on we really get him sort of unleashed. But I find that really intriguing because I feel like in episode 1 he kind of gets angry and like throw some and telekinetically throw some stuff around and so it's like, okay, why are they so worried about this guy? And I feel like the series does a really nice job of sort of like giving us his powers in kind of dribs and drabs. And I think you mentioned the sort of the ductwork of his memory house. And that really also, I think, speaks to the depth of his mental abilities. Like, we've got this very extensive memory room, which actually, interestingly, is a very sort of medieval concept, like to the memory house, the memory castle, as a way to contemplate the self. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But I really think that we start to get that maybe possibly in 3. I'm kind of I might be misremembering here, but like just the extent of his power, we're getting a little bit more and more of what he can do, and I think that's another way in which this series keeps you coming back for more, figuring out what his capabilities are.
I know that in that 3rd episode, some of my theories and thoughts about who the Devil of the Yellow Eyes, and we talked about this after the 1st episode, there were certainly 2 ways they probably could go if they wanted to go X-Men continuity, and I think it was the 3rd episode where you start to see, this feels like kind of a weird space. It's in his head, but then there was that thought that it's not just in his head, and they didn't put a name to it for a while. I think the 4th episode is where they actually introduce it formally. But like this idea, and then kind of in that 4th episode, they really start to confirm, oh yeah, this is a astral plane. I think the first time they even say it, they kind of talk around it, like, oh, it's like some kind of plane of projection or like a dream plane. Yeah, they talk around us, shared unconscious or some kind of Jungian thing or whatever. But yeah, no, the 3rd episode is I think again where after that 2nd episode maybe kind of dialing it down and doing some foundational stuff to get the engine going. This 3rd episode, when they really did start exploring his past, is again where I kind of lit up and was like, oh, this is great, this is cool, I like this, I want more of this. Mm-hmm. And I think that only got built more and more over the next few episodes after that.
Okay, well, you wanted more of this, so that moves us on to chapter 4. We find that David is not waking up from the sedative, and the others are unable to trust the memories that they have seen. Melanie sends Sid and Tanami to find David's ex-girlfriend, Philly, to find out what actually happened before he was admitted to Clockworks, along with Carrie, a warrior woman who lives inside Carrie. Boy, that's awkward to say. Only comes out for action. Tanami enters Philly's memories and investigates the office of David's old psychologist, Poole, and learns that David's friend was a man named Benny, not a woman named Lenny, and that David attacked Poole, who now lives in a lighthouse. At the lighthouse, the trio begin discussing David with Poole until he reveals himself to be the Eye, with the lighthouse surrounded with Division 3 soldiers. Meanwhile, David's mind is trapped in the astral plane, where he comes across a trapped Oliver. David refuses to wait for rescue with Oliver, and instead escapes himself with encouragement from an apparition of Lenny. David rescues the others from the Eye, but the latter shoots Carrie as she escapes.
So this episode, I think, is again where all of the things they had been building in the third episode really paid off, at least to move things forward and sort of show the wider plot. And this is, again, where I felt like it really engaged more. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack in this, and I wanted to find the right time to sort of bring this up. But Jeff Russo has been the guy who has scored Noah Hawley's other shows, the Fargo, both seasons. And what I love about Russo is he's good at playing cover artist or cover band, but he's also got a really sort of broad range. When I say cover, I should say like that first Fargo, he uses some of the same themes from the movie Fargo soundtrack by, I just listened to it. I can't think. I'll think of it by the end. But then he does his own thing, all within sort of fitting in the style of that original soundtrack. Similarly, in the soundtrack he did for Legion, there was a lot of kind of interesting Pink Floydian references, both overt, like flat out they used Pink Floyd in one episode, but like also in some of the motifs and sort of underlying ostinato stuff they do. And I admit I've been spending a lot of time listening to the soundtrack, so it's been foremost in my thoughts. But this episode, they like really, with all the memory stuff and with all the sort of adventure going out into the world, they really played a lot of it. And that astral plane thing, where they finally sort of put the name on it and introduce Oliver, played by, oh my God, the amazing Jermaine Clement from the Flight Conchords, in his very best leisure suit. I think sort of built off not a character, but like he had done this, and I gotta look it up. I don't know if you guys know. He had done this sort of movie or sort of short piece that he played this character who's sort of a very sci-fi author, sort of almost like what's the guy who did Diana?
Yes.
L. Ron Hubbard-esque character. So this is totally that. And I love it because I love that idea and I love that he plays off the character. But anyway, like seeing all that totally confirmed. I mean, they said astral plane. I think we all went, oh shit, this is the Shadow King. Like That was the moment where you're like, oh, that's right. Oh my God. And you even think, oh, the Devil with the Yellow Eyes is sort of looks a little like the Farouk when they actually had him in sort of the flesh. And somewhat even in his sort of weird astral monster form, some kind of a hodgepodge of the two. That fourth episode, I think, is again really where like so many little revelations of what was going on and tying into the bigger world and getting a little bit more action, like kicked that show to me into like, I think the high that kind of carried through to the end of the show. I mean, there were some other moments throughout the rest of the episodes, but that one really started it on its sort of a strong finish, I think, towards the end.
Yeah, and this is actually the halfway point too. So, at this point we should be, learning as much as we possibly can about these characters before, the long march towards the resolution at the end. But what's really interesting, and I just remembered this. This is not actually the first full appearance of. Oh my God! I totally just blanked on his name. You just said it. Jermaine Clement. His voice is actually in the third episode at the very beginning. Melanie Bird is playing with the coffee maker, and the coffee maker is telling a parable, and it is Jermaine Clement's voice, and she keeps, she has him repeat it over and over again. And of course, it's, supposed to show that she's still pining after him, and we don't know where he's gone or what's happened to him until the fourth episode. But it's just really interesting when his voice popped up. I was like, oh my God, Jermaine Clement's in this show. That's so awesome! I can't wait. And then of course he didn't disappoint in episode 4 as his as the leisure suit. I don't really know, like L. Ron Hubbard is pretty good, or possibly more of a Garth Marenghi figure, if anybody's familiar with Garth Marenghi's Dark
Place.
Place.
Absolutely, yep. And
I think
yeah, he's not in that show, but yeah, he's very similar theme.
Exactly, and just the delivery and his his sort of slimy but not in a threatening way kind of conversation that he's having with David is like, just stick around, you can make anything you want here, just you just shouldn't leave because it's bad outside.
My comparison was awful in my head.
Oh,
it was Jonestown Jim Jones mixed with Travolta's Tony Manero.
That is certainly awful, Bill.
But in certain hands, that could be wonderful. Okay. Chris, anything you want to add?
I just want to add the one thing that I was thinking about is one of the things that I've really appreciated about the show is the way in which it sort of keeps the audience off kilter, and I feel like that Jermaine Clement moment, the leisure suit thing, sort of speaks to that. Like, when is this happening? One of the costume, which I love, the color schemes, the sort of Wes Anderson feel to this whole thing. And we mentioned earlier the sort of the architecture of the buildings. I never quite figured out when this was happening, and I kind of appreciated that too. Another way in which the audience sort of it's just the current X-Men universe. Is this happening in the 60s? Is this and so anyway, I think that also speaks to the soundtrack, which I think tends to skew earlier, sort of 70s and 60s as well, to some extent. To get ready for this podcast, when I was walking my dog, I was listening to Dark Side of the Moon.
And I think you also had Amy's hair and dress.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, threw me off on that.
That bright green, yeah.
Right. A lot of the Summerland things almost looked fairly Britpop, which was also referencing something from the 60s, but moving it forward to the 90s. I did definitely feel the same way of like, all right, where in my head should I route this time-wise?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So one thing I want to mention, the person who was incarcerated next to Amy was Dr. Kissinger, who at one point was treating David at Summerland, and I didn't think that was a false memory or anything.
He shows up one more time after they've, when David goes to attack the facility and rescue his sister.
And he doesn't get rescued. That's
and
right.
he does not get rescued.
Right. Okay.
But I think the purpose that he played there, of course, was to have Amy deliver that fateful line. What dog? We didn't have a dog. And that right there, that's where if you didn't have an inkling of who the character could have been, with the astral plane, with the constant hints, and of course with Aubrey Plaza's brilliant turn as Lenny, where this is the episode where she becomes sinister, where you start to see that she's not just a memory, she's not just a ghost. There's something else behind it. And then, of course, when she says, "Oh, we never had a dog," what was the dog's name? King. Where was the dog? The dog appeared magically out of nowhere in David's mind. He doesn't have any idea where it went and what happened to it. And it's always being sort of, compounded with the angriest boy in the world's appearance. And so, you're just like, oh, okay.
Right.
Is this? I might be wrong. Is this the episode where Carrie sort of stitches that all together for us?
Not yet. I don't think he does until the 5th episode, because the fifth episode is when they see, when David goes to rescue Amy and they see the destruction and they realize there's something. This is not David. There's something else in David.
Okay, well, you mentioned Chapter 5. Let's give the squib on that. Carrie is brought back to Summerland, where Carrie heals her. This is tough to say this. Carrie. David tells Melanie about Oliver and demonstrates his mastery of the astral plane by creating a room where he and Sid can be together without her physical powers interfering. David soon escapes to rescue Amy, and Melanie's team arrives at Division 3 to find almost everyone murdered by David. After going over the latter's scans, Carrie deduces that David's mind is infected with a parasite that he knows as the gruesome devil with yellow eyes. David takes Amy to their childhood home, where she reveals that he was adopted. Lenny appears to emerge from David's mind and explains that she has been in control of his body. Melanie's team tracks them to the house, followed by the Eye, and they find Lenny attacking David. The Eye shoots at David, and Sid has him take them to the astral plane. There, David is helpless as the devil with yellow eyes attacks Sid until he wills their entire group into an astral fantasy. They are patients of Clockwork's under the care of Lenny. I was shaking at the end of this episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was the most intense I felt that the show had gotten.
Well, I mean, most of the episodes, not every episode, but most of the episodes ended with me jumping off the couch going, what the fuck, you can't stop it there, that's basically, that was my feeling almost every episode, not every single one, but just the sheer emotional impact of the final minute of that episode just kind of jolted you right back to the first episode with Clockworks, and that it's wrong. You absolutely know that everything that you're seeing is false, but there's that little bit of doubt, and you know that it's false because you know that everything is being manipulated by Lenny, but then maybe not, because all of a sudden the perspective kind of changes a little bit, and now you're back sort of following Sid. So it's interesting. It's an interesting feeling to have at the end of a show that is playing with your mind, to just kind of stop you right at that point, and then you have to wait a week, unless you're binge watching it, in which case screw you guys, because the rest of us had to watch it week to week.
Right.
Well, I feel like that was another bold choice that the show made. Like, so many shows might have used this as sort of that like climax, and then sort of just done something to sort of tie it off and do a denouement. But this was a major set piece that didn't do that, and in fact kind of shunted off into kind of like what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is doing, this sort of alternate reality thing that isn't quite reality but still has that trappings of reality. And just like it was really a brave choice, and I really enjoyed it because by now, as we've seen, Aubrey Plaza just kept ramping up more and more amazing screen time and ridiculousness. And she had kind of started to make her presence. I mean, she's made her presence more and more known. And then the devil figure, which, by the way, if you ever want to really creep out, go watch the makeup, sort of the making of that character. They had this really tall, thin, pasty white guy who played that character, and then they just added all that fat around him but kept his skinny arms and I think even skinny legs to really have that weird contrast. It's kind of disturbing and amazing too. But the thing I was most disturbed by in all this was that David had given himself over willingly to this entity to really strike back and create such havoc. And like all of the scenes where he would be walking and sort of dancing and having fun running around Division 3, just mangling the guards, like it was really disturbing and kind of amazing too, because you were rooting for him, even though you knew he was this evil, he was possessed, so to speak, or taken over by this evil character. But you didn't quite yet know the extent to which that control had given until the very end of that episode. So like, that was really, really cool and kind of dark, and obviously building up to the thing in the house where the sort of mindscape thing takes over. That I agree, like that was a hell of an ending to that episode with everything else that had happened. But yeah, I loved this episode. Just again, some great set pieces and just like X-Men, but by way of some Wes Anderson / other crazy and interesting, again, storytelling choices.
Because this is the episode that ends with the gunshot, right? This is the episode. That's the episode we're on, right?
Yeah, it ends with the gunshot freeze, and then
and then they wake up and
Right, because what I'm thinking about is that moment. I think this is an interesting storytelling thing. So they stop pretty much the narrative. And the rest of the season is pretty much that moment. But we're in this astral plane. We're in this mental house. So it's an interesting. I feel like it's an interesting narrative choice. Like, we're going to stop the action right here, and the rest of the season is going to be that stopped action moment, and then we're going to come back to that later. But we've got to deal with all of these other issues, but it's going to be in his head. And I think that's a pretty brilliant movement, a fascinating way to address his struggle. And I think that too, that here we've got that moment where this is David unleashed. This is him at his pure id. And so how are we going to get him back? How are we going to balance him out again? And I think that the show sets that up really nicely here.
Okay, just two takeaways I wanted to mention from this episode. Holy shit, the use of the Daily Mail by Radiohead. Whoa. And then I felt the look on Gene Smart's face when they were in the group session. It said libraries, not volumes, libraries. She just is that good. Okay. Moving on to Chapter 6. In the shared hallucination, Lenny discusses personal issues with each of them, such as Melanie's refusal to let go of her long-missing husband, and Tonomy's having seen his mother die when he was a child. Though most of the group are unaware of the true nature of their surroundings, Sid notices that their new reality is different from some of her memories. Lenny confronts Sid and places her in a coma. Carrie is visited by Oliver, who takes him to his home on the astral plane. Carrie goes looking for Carrie, but is attacked and chased by the Eye. Oliver appears to Melanie and leads her to the physical room where their bodies are. Time appears to them to have slowed down, with their physical bodies frozen and the bullet shot by the Eye having not yet reached Sid and David. Lenny, who is shown to be another form of the devil with the yellow eyes, reveals that she once knew David's biological father and specifically targeted David. She then shows her control of his mind by locking David away in a corner of his own mind. Steve, I think you had, after this episode had aired, you on one of our IMs were like, holy shit, or something.
Yeah, I think that there were a couple of those holy shit moments, and I think first off, I do, going along with what Chris had started to talk about, the producers making an interesting choice to freeze the action right at that gunshot and then spend the next 2 episodes in Clockworks, or at least this version of Clockworks. They also made the choice to focus on the other members of the team. Lenny is talking to each one of these people in a way that, of course she's directing the conversation to have them sort of understand that, oh, well, you're crazy. This is a problem. None of these things that you're thinking are actually correct. But you actually get to delve into the memories of each one of these different characters and the, what makes them tick in a very vulnerable way. Also, you do realize, I think in this episode, because Sid pretty much carries most of the action, most of the perspective is hers, up till the, I'd say the last 10, 15 minutes when she's, when she's comatose. But, you get to see Carrie in a very interesting light. You get to see female Carrie's vulnerability. You get to see Melanie's fragility. Like she is extremely fragile without Oliver, and up to this point she's been trying to hide it with a shell of professionalism. And she, at this point where she's allowed to be weak, where she's allowed to be a mess because she's crazy, she's in a mental institution, you see what she's really actually struggling with. And I think we're seeing who these people really are when reality is stripped away and they're only in their heads. We see Carrie as fearful. We see male Carrie as actually being the one to forge ahead and take risks, whereas the female Carrie is, normally a very strong character, is, terrified and threatened by the Eye. But Sid, of course, whether it's in the main world or in this, in this fake reality, she is the one who seems to have a better grasp on what's real, what's not, and how important her role is in saving David. Because David essentially is the damsel in distress in this, even though he doesn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when he's locked away at the end of this chapter, very literally locked away in sort of a small box in the back of his mind. I think that at that moment, that's where I think I texted you, Bill. I was like, "Holy shit, this is insane! She's gonna take over. This is like, oh, I love Aubrey Plaza. She has gone through every possible version of this character of Lenny / the Shadow King / Benny / whatever throughout, at this point, 6 episodes. She's shown us true crazy, but crazy fun. She's shown us crazy creepy. She's shown us crazy vicious and sadistic and manipulative, and then sweetly manipulative. It's just so fascinating seeing her, her ability to really take this character on. And, I love it when she was on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Aubrey Plaza kept me coming back in so many ways. And, I keep thinking about her character on Parks and Rec. Just, and how, April Ludgate is really my, in many ways my idol. And I try to make sure. Anyway, I was captivated by her performance, and I really feel like too, one of the interesting things about this episode is how her character tries to convince everybody that they're kind of like they're not who they are in a certain way. There is so all along we've been thinking about David has been kind of diagnosed with sort of dissociative disorder, and in this episode, her when he's in therapy, she convinces him that he's quote unquote just a manic depressive, and so that somehow he's misunderstood who he is, and that's why he's there. So I think that again, this is one of those episodes. I keep going back to this point where it's keeping the audience, a little bit off kilter. Are these people, are these people damaged? Are these people, are they really unsure of their mission? What is wrong with them? I feel like that this is one of those episodes that really messes with our heads as we're trying to figure out how they're going to get out of this astral plane.
Brian, anything to add?
No, I think you guys have covered it. Like, this episode was great, and it definitely sets more sort of ammo for what happens after in sort of the final resolution. But I love a good alternate reality sort of mindscape. When the Magicians did it in season 1, somewhat last year, not recently. And then, like I said, sort of what the event or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is doing. Like, it's nice. It can be refreshing because it gives you like a new set of eyes on characters and explores the characters in ways you couldn't have otherwise. So like that, this show had such inertia and then sort of took a side path, like, side road that was sort of a character building was really impressive. Again, it's sort of bold storytelling choices that you don't see as often as you might want.
It's kind of like this is a team story after all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to Chapter 7. On the astral plane, Oliver explains to Carrie that he has been watching David and believes this parasite is Amul Farouk, the Shadow King, a powerful mutant that they are both aware of. Carrie explains that his physical body holds a device that may be able to isolate the parasite from David's mind temporarily. Carrie wakes Sid and sends her to help the others, while he, Oliver, and Melanie attempt to affect the physical world by getting the device to David. Farouk, as Lenny, attacks Sid, Carrie in the eye, killing the latter. his physical body dies as well. David figures out that Farouk and his father were both powerful mutants who had fought some time ago, with Farouk losing. His father then put David up for adoption to protect him from Farouk, but the latter was able to find David and infect his mind since he was young. With the device locking Farouk away in David's mind, he returns to his physical body and catches the bullets. The group then return to Summerland, but are attacked there by Division 3 soldiers. Division 3 pylon.
It's the pylon.
I love this episode. I mean, episode 6 and episode 7 were probably two of the strongest episodes, and I think probably also the nerdiest ones.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are an X-Men fan, this is where everything gets laid bare in what's basically blunt force exposition, but at the same time, it's done in a very clever way. So, I don't mind, good old Dan Stevens getting to use his own accent when explaining everything. So it makes it seem very, intelligent. It's always, everything sounds better when it's got a British accent,
Just so that not a passing reference, he has a conversation with himself. And his inner, how would you put it?
His inner Crawley?
Yeah. His inner Crawley happens to have a British accent. Yep.
Yes. I love this. And
oh my God, I am so adopting inner Crowley. Oh my God.
No, but I honestly, I thought this was such a great way to do it, and it was done in a way that it made boys and girls squeal with delight, but actually explained it for people who may not have been X-Men fans and who somehow stuck it out this far into in what is ostensibly a crazy, crazy series. And of course, Lenny's disintegration. You start seeing that really start to happen here. You get to see, of course, the power that David can actually have in the astral plane. But and also, of course, I think it really does delve into psychedelic horror at this point as well. In the fact that everything around them is just devolved into these screaming, mental patients that really aren't there. It's just just an image that unfortunately some people are suffering through, and that's of course the female Carrie. But yeah, love this episode. Love it.
It was the zombie show Faint.
Yes.
Yes. I didn't ever expect that they would do this kind of thing, and yet because they're in that sort of altered reality astral plane, they totally did. I will say that this is where I wish they had been a little more obscure / opaque about. I don't want them calling him Amal Farouk. I don't even know that I need to see explicit references to Xavier. I feel like a lot of this overall, and I mean, I get it. I totally get it. But I feel like a lot of this could have been notes from the studio. Noah had one version of it that just sort of told the story and did his thing. And then the producer's yeah, but maybe we should put this in to make it give a little red meat to the fanboys. And I mean, part of me likes it, of course, but the other part of me is you don't need to do that. You're okay leaving it a little bit more abstract. But I don't know. I mean, overall, I did enjoy it. So
if that was the result of studio interference, then that was one of the most subversive interpretations of studio interference, I thought.
Oh, yeah?
I thought it was handled so well. It provided the red meat, but at the same token gave you some other parts of the meal. How's that? Huh?
It was a tasty metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I have to say, best use of Bolero since 10.
Oh, yes.
And,
yes.
Beyond that, I thought, again, because of the acceleration that we had in episode 7 and 8, we didn't really have too much of this, but when Oliver returns to the physical world, he has no memories of Melanie. And it was just astonishing to watch two actors who have to offer familiarity in one context and belie that. I just thought the performances in this episode were fantastic, and that's especially hard to come through sometimes when it is action dominated as this one was.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on to the final episode, Chapter 8. Through a series of flashbacks, we find out that David's interrogator from Division 3, who turns out to be named Clark, was severely burned and struggled to recover from his injuries. We also found out, hey, he's one of them homo gays. He now leads the Division 3 soldiers to Summerland, where David uses his powers to easily subdue them. Taking Clark hostage, David tries to reason with him while his superiors watch through a camera in a prosthetic eye. With Farouk gaining strength, Carrie and Oliver attempt to extract the former from David, while Farouk uses David's mind to talk to Sid. Warning her that David will not survive this process, Sid decides to kiss David, transferring Farouk to her own body. Farouk then leaves Sid, entering Carrie's body and using her to fight off the others until being confronted by David. David sends Farouk out of Carrie, but unknowingly into Oliver's body. Farouk escapes Summerland in Oliver's body, while Clark agrees to work with the mutants to stop him. Later, David is miniaturized and trapped by a throne-like device.
And then things got really weird.
Yeah.
So, I'll be honest, I love Hamish Linklater. Every time I see him in anything,
Yep.
love him. So happy. My partner Pat still watches like the New Adventures of Old Christine,
I love that
which
show.
I had never seen it. I had never seen it during its initial run. I had heard of it, but I really just didn't care. And now, because it's sort of kind of constantly on in the background, I've gotten to see much of it, although very out of order. And I love it. He's great. And then in the young ones, Robin Williams, and Michelle.
Crazy Ones.
The Crazy Ones, sorry.
Crazy,
The Young
yeah.
Ones is the British show from way back. And Sarah Michelle Gellar, like that was another just very underrated, overlooked show that he was a part of. I will say, as much as I loved his part of this, like I love the backstory, I love that he's one half of the gay couple with an adopted child, and yet he's also in this sort of terrible military organization, evidently with his partner. Maybe they met on the job, I don't know. I felt like this was sort of paint by numbers. A lot of the things that played out felt very, at least in the last half, sort of the resolve, sort of predictable, sort of like, okay, well, we know what her power is, and we know what they're sort of setting up for her, the Sid. And then the only surprise, and it did really kind of surprise me at first, is I didn't know what they were doing with Oliver. It was sort of an odd, like, adventure. He was out flipping switches in that silo. Yeah. It was like, what is going on here? Are you setting him up to die? Because that's what it felt like. They were going to blow him up or do something tragic. But then that sort of did surprise me that they would, sort of knock the Shadow King into his body. But like, I don't know, a lot of it, and not including the tag at the end with the thing that we mentioned, but just everything up through that, it just felt like at some point there may have been a different ending that was a little more interesting, and maybe because it was sort of on the bubble, or they didn't know if it would get a second season, or if they didn't know, that they may have had to go in and maybe do some changes to make it sort of continue on, because it felt sort of anticlimactic to me.
I would agree with that, and there was that sort of smell of, okay, we got renewed. I really felt that. I think you can foreshadow what's to come without it being as my vocabulary sucks tonight. I just thought it was clunky. I thought they could have gotten to that same point in a different manner.
Yeah, I agree.
That's just what I was coming away with, and it just felt like a knee-jerk. We got renewed. We can tell the second story that we want to tell. This is an element of it, maybe not the best element to show.
Even the choice of Comfortably Numb, as amazing as that was, with everything else being so heavily steeped in Pink Floyd, it was a little too on the nose. Like, I still liked it, and again, this is sort of his rolling back of his history that we saw at the beginning of the show, the beginning of the series, with the Shadow King being kind of excised from it like a jilted lover, that you're going back through your memories and your mementos and scratching them out. Like, it was really powerful and kind of cool and very cathartic. But also just like, I don't know, just a little too rote, a little too, okay, this is now what I would expect this show to do, not the unexpected, which is what made it so charming for most of its run. Although, again, the end with the miniaturization, which I have my own little theory about, That was surprising, albeit really kind of bizarre. But that was the show going, oh yeah, that's right. You do weird things and you're kind of cool. So thanks.
I just thought tone-wise, it would have been so much more effective to end with Children of the Revolution playing.
Oh yeah.
I just thought that was so terse, and as you mentioned, Pink Floyd. This is the most Pink Floyd dominated episode musically. At one point with the montage, you have 3 Pink Floyd songs playing at the same time.
Oh yeah.
This was the stoner episode as far as I was concerned. At least after the 20-minute mark.
Actually, I think it'd be more of like the stoner episode after they're starting to come down and they're really feeling paranoid. I think you guys are all being a little harsh on this one. I think it was actually a great way to end it, given that the last 2 episodes were so strong. You really there's not a lot of places to go from there, and I think the real meat of this episode was that sequence of probably only about 15 minutes where Bryan, like you just talked about, where the Shadow King's being excised out of David's memories, and it looks like he's slowly melting away, and that he's going to be like, this is it, this is the end. And of course he sort of wakes up a little bit because he's made a bargain with Sid. He's manipulated Sid into letting him free in a way. But that segment where he goes from the memories being destroyed to Sid's bodies to Carrie's body, and then of course the short fight sequence. It's a really short period of time, but it's probably the main point of this episode. Now, the last scene where he gets miniaturized into that little thing, to me it felt like a stinger, which is probably the most Marvelous of all Marvel things from the movies now, is that everyone expects that rather than have, the movie end, credits roll, go home, it's movie end, credits roll maybe a little bit, or you think it's the end, and then there's a stinger that teases what's next to come. And that's exactly what that little thing felt like. They could have stopped it at Oliver and Lenny driving off into the sunset, or driving off into the mountains. They could have stopped it right there, and it wouldn't have been terrible. But they had to tack that little stinger on, and I appreciate for it, because it was probably the only thing that Marvel Studios insisted had to happen if this thing was going to get renewed. It's like, oh, we have to tease the second season. We have to do something to show, to encourage people that they're, to watch the next, possible storyline that we're going to set up. Hopefully they have an idea of what they're doing next, and that they're not just faking us out with some weird miniaturization thing, but or drone. What was that thing?
It's like it does feel like a drone or something. So may I give you my theory? And this is totally just random.
It's all theory at this point. So
I mean, of course, I want it to be and what I want it to be is I want it to be a completely different story that has nothing to do with the Shadow King, maybe at least at first. Division 3 has kind of become neutered and probably not an issue, so it may go away from that. I would even honestly prefer if most of the Summerland people don't come back again right away, maybe towards the middle or end of the second season. But I want to see them do a murder world / arcade story. So I don't know what suggested that to me, other than maybe just the technology. I mean, of course, then the other crazy side, and this would be like really a bold storytelling choice, is if they did a Mojoverse thing with that, because that also would sort of be a weird and bizarre technological alternate dimension sort of thing. So I don't know. Like, I'm really, as much as I didn't love it. What's that? Oh yeah, I know, right?
Long shot, because I'd be all over that.
Oh my god. Like, I feel like that's a bridge too far for this show, but I mean, oh my god, it would be amazing, right?
I'll be amazing.
Really? I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's a bridge too far for this show. I mean, we've already been subjected to, a lot of psychological manipulation by not just the characters, not just the villain in this, but also the showrunners themselves. The producers are just playing around with your expectations from episode to episode. And I think that they could go something completely off the rails wacky if they did a Mojo, if they did, an arcade murder world where everything is artifice and there's really nothing, you're not sure what's real from one moment to the next, which would fit in to the overarching idea of Legion himself. In the comics, Legion creates his entire world. So everything is basically created by him is a fabrication.
I think the Shadow King might be coming back because I believe Jermaine Clement signed for a second season.
Did Aubrey Plaza?
I think, yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think she might have. I just read something this week where I saw that Jermaine Clement had signed for the second season of Legion.
Nice.
So he'll be back.
I think this is our opportunity to introduce NFL Super Pro.
Oh wow.
That's the
It
big
is.
switch. Yep.
This could
They
be
get
it.
That crazy. Yeah.
Honestly, they could. I mean, they have. I mean, if you are limited by the X-Men mythos in trying to, create some kind of storyline, there's a lot of batshit fucked up crazy shit that went down with the X-Men. We've got the Savage Land. Sure, why not have a mutant who's kind of like Tarzan surrounded by dinosaurs? Why not? You could do that. Why not have Mojo? Why not have like a crazy man-child who loves to murder people with robots? Why not? It could be fun.
I also thought of something a bit crazy, and you can talk me down from this, but
Nice.
in terms of maintaining license and the possibility of another Fantastic Four film being so minimal, given the performance of the last one, is it that crazy that they throw in some Fantastic Four elements? Because there's certainly, whether it's Psycho Man or there's things with miniaturization that could work there, and that would be a way for Fox to maintain the Fantastic Four license. I was just something that was a crazy idea that I had, because I'm obsessed with licenses. And this is the kind of show that would bring like some of the most batshit crazy elements from these existing franchises and could somehow make it work. I don't know. It was just a thought, a weird thought, but a thought. We're looking at the clock here, and I don't want to keep people too late, but we have been talking X-Talk, and I just wanted to throw out some developments that happened with one particular book, X-Men Gold. Steve is very good at encapsulating controversies and news stories. So, Steve, why don't you tell us what happened with Ardian Syaf and the developments that the interwebs gave a sense of propulsion to when discovering what some signals were in his artwork for that particular book of X-Men Gold #1.
But something happened? Oh, I wasn't paying attention. No, so I know Bill is trying to strangle me through the microphone right now. Ardian Syaf is an Indonesian artist that was brought on.
I discovered it's Ardian.
Ardian? Oh, so
Ardian
Syaf is he's an Indonesian artist that was brought on for X-Men Gold, and he's done at least the first 3 issues. Or most of the art for issues 2 and 3, in addition to issue 1. And in that first issue, there were a couple of little artistic indulgences that a lot of artists are known for doing, and a lot of writers are known for doing historically. But unfortunately, the little indulgences kind of took on a more political and religious bent than perhaps they should have. And referring, of course, to the controversy with, I think is it the mayor of Jakarta?
It's the governor of the region where Syaf lives.
Okay, so the governor of the region is he is a Chinese Christian or Christian of Chinese descent in majority Muslim part of Indonesia, and he was elected, and of course there's a lot of controversy around his election and a particular situation that happened where he quoted, either misquoted or referred to a quotation from the Quran that he said that his opponents were misusing against him. And of course that's happens to be chapter or verse, I guess, 551, which says vaguely something about not taking a non-Islamic counsel or non-Islamic quote-unquote friend is how it's being, I guess, either translated or interpreted in Indonesia, that his opponents are basically saying, well, clearly we can't have a non-Muslim governor. We have to have a Muslim governor. So, of course, it's right to oppose him. And, of course, he's going through right now a trial that's based around the potential blasphemy of misusing a verse from the Quran, even though he didn't actually use it. So anyway, so
G.
Ardian
Willow
actually,
Wilson presented a very well written response and explanation about these verses and how
it's
how they
definitely
can be
what I
interpreted. Yeah.
Yeah, I recommend her essay response wholeheartedly if you can find it. I think Bleeding Cool had a link to it. It's on Tumblr if you follow her, and of course Twitter. But I think it's a really great, quick encapsulation and summary that at least if you're interested in continuing, you can follow some of the links that she has, and of course do some research on your own. But Ardian is of course on the side of the people opposing the governor. So what he did, and as a reader and not knowing this, reading it on Wednesday afternoon, I noticed that there were some odd things, and chief among them, of course, was Colossus's T-shirt, which has QS551 on it, which makes absolutely no sense if you don't know anything about the Quran, which I don't. So it was just sort of like, what is that? What is that in reference to? Something's kind of odd. What's going on there? And of course, apparently throughout the rest of the book, there's references to 212, December 2nd of 2016, which was a day of protests held against the governor. Right. So, it's popping up all over the place. There was one panel, which I think some people had pointed out to, which I think is kind of stretching it, is kind of bullshit. But it also involves the sort of the pickup baseball game that the X-Men are playing, where Nightcrawler is batting, and Kitty Pryde is off in the bleachers speaking with I believe Logan, and Nightcrawler swings and misses, and it appears that his bat, given perspective, is actually smacking Kitty Pryde, off in the distance. That was actually, I think people have kind of determined that that's bullshit. I think there was a lot of stretching with some of the comments there, right, being anti-Jewish.
Right, but there also is that other panel where Kitty is addressing a crowd, and right by her face is the word incomplete, but the word jewelry. Yeah.
Right.
True, but there are also other visual cues that if I were an artist who was totally against her, I probably wouldn't have prominently had a beautiful Star of David pendant, being worn by her in a really great panel. It's actually the thing that really kind of disappoints me the most about this is that Ardian is not a bad artist. He's actually, pretty competent.
Yeah.
As far as
I really liked his work on Batgirl and then later on Batman Superman. Yeah.
Yeah, and in his personal life as well, he does a lot of charity work. He does a lot of teaching. He teaches art to children and does a lot of other community work. But unfortunately, he's kind of fucked his career, at least with Marvel, for now and possibly for quite a long time.
I mean, I think at this point I can't conceive of a mainstream Western publisher giving him work.
Well, I mean, somebody was mentioning it at my LCS. Oh, sorry.
Because again, he's basically been unapologetic.
Yeah.
In relation to that, and I think what strikes some people, and again, Steve, I understand where you're coming from, and I think there are other references like the 212 can easily be dismissed, given that that's New York's area code.
Yeah, 212. Yeah.
With that, I think what's particularly upsetting about this is you're talking about a comic series which has been the vanguard of tolerance, and for that to be infiltrated by expressions of, I think however you effectively look at it, an expression of intolerance, I think is what is really troubling to some people.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. Yeah. Very much so.
Does anybody else have anything to say on that?
You guys have really covered it well. I think he is very passionate about his causes, and obviously that passion can be amazing and transformative and lead you to do some really powerful work. I think, and I don't know how old he is. I'm guessing he's probably a little younger, maybe not super. I don't know.
Gail Simone posted, and I think she said she was like early 30s or so.
So yeah. I feel like he made a really just immature choice. Like, I don't think the guy's a horrible person. I feel like he's from a culture and from a situation that may have painted certain groups with a bad light. And for whatever reason, I can't judge. I'm not in the Indonesian culture. I'm not of that faith. Like, it's hard to apply any kind of filter logic based on, my experience. But when you're doing a commercial, not just your own art's your own art, but when you're doing work for hire and commercial stuff, if you're going to make a political message, you better be damn sure that it is really buried deep in the in the texture, so you're not going to stand out. But you could then point to it later, or, you know, fans in the know could sort of ask you, and you'd be like, hey. But, like, also, maybe at least make sure that whatever you're doing isn't so out there, out of the pale for your audience that it's going to become, like, viewed as hate speech or whatever. Like that's just tone deafness. And
Yeah.
I love that we have a very cultural, I hate that word, but, like, a lot of different cultures and countries have artists now, not writers as much, but definitely artists in the major studios. And I think part of that isn't just to be more multicultural, it's to find cheap art. But, like, I'm glad that exists, but I feel like sometimes it creates really tone deaf understandings of the culture that you're portraying. The other thing, this is totally lame, but if you go back to that issue, there's some, I think, depiction of baseball in Central Park. That's this issue, right?
Yeah, they're in Central Park.
And it's horrid. Like, the guy has never seen baseball, it seems like, from looking at the way he depicts everything about it. And I'm totally crediting iFanboy for pointing that out, because I blew through it, because ultimately I thought this issue was just meh, and I didn't care. But when I went back and looked at it, I was like, oh my God, I don't even love baseball, and I can tell you this is not baseball. So, you know.
Yeah, as somebody who was on the archery team in college, one thing that drives me crazy sometimes, I don't think you have to become an archery expert to draw a green arrow, but you need to know some basics. And that sometimes there are things that just drive me crazy. Oh God, just look at pictures, dude. Tangent, sidebar. I just wanted to throw out to you guys, because I have to throw this out to you guys because I was not reading comics at the time, and I know we're running against the clock and we need to get to the Woofs of the Week really quick, but I just want to know, especially Chris, since you are the guest here, do you have particular fondness for the period when the X-Men split into two teams? And
yeah, the golden blue team, I really liked that split at the time. You had, Storm leading one, and Jean Grey and Iceman, and Colossus and Archangel, and Bishop on one team, and then the sort of Beast and Wolverine and Rogue and Psylocke. And I like that split at the time. I'm curious to know how they'll be able to retain that sort of energy with these new teams, especially as it seems to me that and again, I haven't read the new series, but they're keeping that sort of original, the X-Men out of time as the one team, and then the sort of, I don't know, sort of maybe more traditional X-Men as the other team. So I'm curious how they'll keep that energy. But I'm intrigued by the split.
Steve, Bryan, fond memories or?
Yeah, I mean, that was when I had actually been reading the X-Men up to that point, like consuming all the classic X-Men issues that were being printed at the time, and then of course Uncanny X-Men leading up to that, because I think right before it was
Extinction Agenda, right?
It was Extinction Agenda, and then there was a brief foray, I think, into space. Around that time, I want to say, because I think Xavier at this point was walking again. Lalandra was factoring in something in one of the issues around there.
So is this just after Jubilee and Gambit are introduced?
It's soon afterwards. I think it was
okay.
Yeah.
But they were definitely around by the time the split happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, and that I actually, leading up to that point and getting to read X-Men, X-Men #1, which of course was Jim Lee's, Big Baby.
Mm-hmm.
That huge wraparound cover and 15 versions of the huge wraparound cover that I think most people bought. It was a big event. Like it was a really huge thing that X-Men #1 was happening. And of course there's so much other stuff going on at the same time. You had New
9 million copy print run.
9 million?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, you had so much going on. It was this was the era of event comics and event issues, and everything was big. A new number one was a huge deal, and it was the X-Men. I mean, you couldn't get any crazier than that. And so, I loved how they split the teams. I really did enjoy the different feels that the two books had. It was just it was a lot of fun. Like, X-Men was the big flashy version, and of course it was part of the new group of artists. So you had Jim Lee on that, you had McFarlane on Spider-Man, you had a couple other big names. Liefeld on X-Force and New Mutants, and then of course you had Uncanny X-Men, which still kind of had more of the traditional continuity. It felt like it was, because it was continuing the numbering. But man, no, that was such a great time for the X-Men. Right before all of the Marvel big name superstars left and formed Image. Like, that was a great
diaspora.
Yes,
Yeah.
That was such a great time to read the X-Men. It was so many big storylines, so many big occurrences were happening. It just so much fun.
Brian, anything there?
I mean, no, I liked it. I had a good time back in that era. I feel like it was pretty good, but I don't know, I'm not married to this idea of splitting it into two teams. And even what they're trying to do now, for better or for worse, like to recapture that sort of spirit, it's I don't think you can go back there without really turning back the clock. And we saw how that played out in X-Men 92 and X-Men Forever. Like, you really just can't go back to that. But, I mean, they're trying in some ways. And in some ways, they're successful. I mean, I don't know if we want to go too much into it, but overall, one of the two, Gold versus Blue, is, I feel like, a much stronger story. But I don't know. It was an era. It was the 90s. We did a lot of crazy things.
Okay, well, as I've been mentioning, we're against the clock, so the clock is winning right now, so we're going to start wrapping up this show. And when we wrap up an episode of the Comic Book Bears, we leave you with a final segment, which is something we call the Woofs of the Week segment, where we signify something, might be a comic book, might be a film, TV show, charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may enjoy being exposed to. We are nothing if not gracious, so we'll start with Chris. Chris, what is your Woof of the Week?
I have to say that one of the, and I'm not collecting this in trade, is Monstrous. If anybody has, I'm very new to this comic. But I'm in love with it. The art is fantastic. The story is awesome. I can't wait to get the second volume. I already pre-ordered it. So I'm going to plug that Monstrous as one of the things that I'm really infatuated by right now. That'd be my Wolf of the Week.
Let's move. Well, Steve, since you have the microphone, move on to you. What is your Woof of the Week?
Well, everybody expects me to talk about TV, so I won't disappoint. Hulu has a new series that's just come out on its streaming service. It's being released weekly. It's, of course, a co-production with ITV in Britain called Harlots. And it's about harlots. It's basically about late 18th century whores, or sex workers, as they should be known now. But back then they were known as boards or sluts or slatterns or whatever. It is some of the most supremely brilliant writing of a period drama that I've seen in recent years. The costumes are fantastic. The hair is fantastic. The insults that they throw at each other in late 18th century slang is just absolutely fantastic. You'll have some insults. Watching an episode or two, you're going to have some insults that you can throw around the office or at home and have people look at you like you're an insane person. But it is brilliant. Samantha Morton is honestly a national treasure in the UK, and she does an amazing turn here.
Awesome. Let's move on to Brian. Brian, what is your Woof of the Week?
So when this comes out, I believe, the first episode of Doctor Who season 10 will have been released.
Yay!
And also, for those of us who have not been overseas or found ways to get it previously, Class, the show by the fabulous writer Patrick Ness, and it's also a Doctor Who spinoff, will also have come out. And I know Steve, at least of those of us, has seen parts of it and said it's pretty good. So I'm very excited about seeing this finally. And I am especially happy about Doctor Who being back, not just because I'm a big Doctor Who nut, as we all know, but also because the companion, Bill, is openly gay in the show. And I don't think I realized that, and maybe they didn't say that until somewhat recently, but I think that is actually really awesome. And I mean, not that gay characters and or storylines have been unheard of from Doctor Who, at least since it was brought back in 2005, but that Bill is an openly gay companion, it does put the focus somewhat front and center on her and potentially her relationships. So I am super excited to have that representation in a show that is already, like I said, immensely powerful for queer people out there. And I'm thrilled it's coming back, because I think honestly right now, this world that we're in is dark and full of terror. Is that the right phrase? And so, like, I'm just so happy that a beacon of hope and light is coming back into the world. The other thing I will say, and this is sort of a pre-Woof, is the American Gods that is coming out also thrills my heart and makes me feel full of joy. And every little morsel of thing we get out of that coming out later in April just gets me more and more excited for more Bryan Fuller television, which, again, since Hannibal ended, last year, I guess? It's been too long. Both Doctor Who and Bryan Fuller have been out of my life for far too long, and I'm very happy that they'll be back in a regular part of my my week. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Did anybody pick up the first issue of the Dark Horse series?
I did.
Yeah, I had too. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, me too.
It's good. It is good. It's I mean, if you've read the book, it's a retelling of the book, but I do like the way that it's being done. I mean, Neil Gaiman has had, comic and graphic novel adaptations of his books before. Stardust being a big one. A few of his other novels, but this one definitely I think is going in a good direction. So
my Woof of the Week goes out to the New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival, which recently happened in Edison, New Jersey. My good friend Tito Gutierrez was visiting from Los Angeles, and while he was out here, we ended up going to that show. I certainly want to thank the promoters for providing me with a press pass, and the highlight for us was meeting Mink Stoll of the John Waters Films fame, and or as Tito and I refer to her now as Nancy, and it was just wonderful being able to speak to her for something like 45 minutes or so. And it was a nice little con. It looks like they have a very nice template to work from. New Jersey has a number of very big horror conventions. And again, when you say horror conventions, there's so many other genres that feed into that, whether it be sci-fi or comic books. It's almost like a comic convention. You can't just underline and highlight the word and say that's all there is. They are having their second festival later on this year in September. On September 22nd through the 24th. That's my Woof, the New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival. We also had a Frankenhooker reunion, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, but it is batshit crazy from 1990. I do hope you see it, if just to watch Super Kraken exploding hookers. It's something else. So. All right, well, we're going to wrap this one up. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to subscribe to us, you can do so through iTunes and through Stitcher Radio and a couple of other platforms that feed from those. And if you want to reach out to us via email, you can do so by sending something to comicbookbears@gmail.com. Chris, again, thank you so much for appearing on this show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciated it.
I think I am speaking for my co-hosts that we hope that is the first of many guest appearances as things happen. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Woof!
and shout. Let it all hang out, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. Now you won't fool the children of the revolution. Now, wait, terraplane in the falling rain. I drive a Rolls Royce, 'cause it's good for my voice, but you